It's now time to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe today. Now, Nigeria has recorded 30 new cases of COVID-19, bringing to 373 the total number of confirmed cases in the country. Yesterday, a breakdown was given by the NCDC, saying 25 new cases of the recorded are in Lagos, 2 in the FCT, and 1 each in Kano, Akwa Ibom, and Edo states. Now, according to the NCDC, 99 patients have been discharged, while 11 patients have unfortunately died. A breakdown of the total figures showed that Lagos now has 214 cases, FCT 58, Osun 20, Edo 15, Oyo 11, Ogun 9, Bauchi and Kaduna 6 each, Akwa Ibom 6, Katsina 5, Kwara 4, Kano 4, Ondo and Delta 3 each, Enugu, Ekiti and Rivers 2 each, while Benue, Niger and Anambra states have 1 each. However, the NCDC has projected that the testing capacity would soon ramp up to 4,000 per day, with over 9,000 contacts traced. So contact tracing is increasing, and we've seen quite a good rate. I believe it was at 92%. However, of course, now we have recorded new cases of COVID-19, and unfortunately, 1 more death has also been recorded. Doctor, over to you.
Well, I think, yesterday, Arise News had the second edition of its global briefing on COVID-19.
Yeah.
And a number of points were made by the experts who spoke, who participated in that panel. And I think that this may be a good opportunity to reiterate some of the points that were made. Professor Yewole Tomori is one of the leading professors of virology in Nigeria. And he drew attention to the fact that the testing process in Nigeria is too low. That even if we have the capacity for 1,500 testing, in Nigeria, that would not be enough. And that we need to ramp up our testing capacity. So it's interesting that the Director General of the Center for Disease Control is saying that our capacity is likely to grow from 1,500 to about 4,000. And one other point made by Professor Tomori is that they need to change the criteria for testing, because there have been many persons who had asked for tests, but they are told that unless they present with symptoms, which will be after about 2 weeks, then they cannot be tested. And I think he is of the opinion that the criteria for testing, the case management protocol, all of this will need to be reconsidered if we do not want a situation of an explosion in terms of numbers, in our face. Because as at yesterday, overnight, we had 30 cases. And most of these cases are in Lagos, which now has 214 cases, as you pointed out. Another issue is about the challenge of insecurity. And at the Presidential Task Force briefing yesterday, it was good to see the Inspector General of Police saying that his men have been deployed. All the AIGs in the various zones have been asked to be on alert to make sure that the situation, the public security situation, does not degenerate into anarchy. That is reassuring. And it is for the government to identify the relevant hotspots and make sure that people do not take the laws into their hands. Also, at the briefing yesterday, it was interesting to note the point made by the Minister for Humanitarian Affairs with regard to the distribution of palliatives. 2 points. One, the distribution of rice, because, food distribution was part of the strategies announced by the president. Now, she said that they were supposed to get 150 trucks of rice from the Nigeria Customs Service. But at the end of the day, only 40 trucks were available. And eventually, she was able to take possession only of 20 trucks. Now, when Nigerians heard that Customs Service was going to release 150 trucks of rice, there were expectations. And I think the clarification that she offered is useful, because people will have thought, people were already insinuating that, they could not get the palliatives, they could not get the food, they could not get the rice, maybe the rice has been diverted. I think it's now up to the Customs Service to explain to Nigerians why 150 trucks were promised and only 20 trucks eventually got to the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management and Social Development. There was also a point that was made at that briefing about conditional cash transfers. Yesterday we had, pointed out the concerns in this regard, that the eastern part of the country and the south-south and the southwest seem not to have been well served. But, there was this disclosure that certain agents that were supposed to be in charge of the distribution of cash in certain parts of the country, particularly the east and the south side, have had to be suspended because they've not delivered. But on the good side, Nigeria has received significant support from the United Nations in the form of ventilators, in the form of personal protective equipment. And then one more thing that came out yesterday. The Minister of Information, Alhaji Lai Mohammed, made a clarification that the contribution by the private sector, we've been talking about the private sector contributing 1 billion, 2 billion. He says, no, this contribution is not in the form of cash. That what the private sector has done is to commit to helping government to develop health infrastructure. And I think that clarification is also useful. And that's why communication, has to be regular and has to be quality communication. Because a lot of people, after there was that incident in the office of the Accountant General, many Nigerians just concluded that the money contributed by the private sector had been stolen, as if the Accountant General will keep cash in his office.
Yes, well, I mean, it's useful that he has clarified that, but at the end of the day, that still calls for transparency and accountability, So I don't want them to think that they can try and shove that to the side. We still need accountability and transparency with exactly how those funds are dispersed. Doctor, let's take another news headline. Now, in the United States, President Donald Trump has said that he has directed a halt to U.S. payments to the World Health Organization, pending a review of its warnings about the coronavirus and China. Trump told reporters that the outbreak could have been contained at its source and spared lives had the UN Health Agency done a better job investigating reports coming out of China.
My administration to halt funding of the World Health Organization while a review is conducted to assess the World Health Organization's role in severely mismanaging and covering up the spread of the coronavirus. American taxpayers provide between $400 million and $500 million per year to the WHO. In contrast, China contributes roughly $40 million a year, and even less. As the organization's leading sponsor, the United States has a duty to...
Now, this is a very unfortunate situation that we're seeing here. He has suspended funding to the WHO for a period of 60 to 90 days, he said. Now, what's interesting here, and it goes back to the controversy around Donald Trump as a person anyway, the United Nations, or the WHO rather, declared this as a public health emergency on the 30th of January. President Donald Trump still continued to hold rallies. He still continued to play golf. He still continued to compare the coronavirus to a normal flu. Right? Now, one can actually say that, okay, maybe the WHO could have declared this a pandemic sooner than they did. One can comment on that in many ways. But Donald Trump is also someone who has called for unity on this particular matter, yet he thinks that this is a time to suspend funding to the WHO. Quite frankly, I think this is one of the most disappointing things that he could be doing at this point in time. But am I surprised? Absolutely not, Doctor.
Well, let's go to Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, who says that this is not the time. That this is a time that calls for solidarity. Yeah. This is a time that calls for international unity. Jacinta Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, also says, well, she doesn't agree because this is a time that the WHO needs to be supported. Yeah. Scott Morrison of Australia, the Australian Prime Minister, says while he sympathizes with President Trump, he doesn't think that the WHO should be abandoned now. WHO's response is that nobody should politicize the management of this pandemic. And what President Trump is doing is playing the blame game. Yeah. He blames China. He blames his predecessors. He blames other parties. He is the only one that has no blame. Unfortunately, he has the support of some persons in Congress, some lawmakers in Congress. But truly, this is not the time to do this. Absolutely. It could pose a threat to the management of the pandemic. Let's take a short break. When we return, The Morning Show will continue. Welcome back to The Morning Show here on Arise News. Joining us now is Arise News business analyst Rotus Odiri with Business Stories. Rotus,
Morning.
good morning.
Good morning,
Good
Dr.
morning,
Batsi.
Rotus.
Good
How are
morning,
you?
Leila. I'm fine, thank you. So, look, there's lots of doom and gloom right now as far as the world economy is concerned with how COVID-19 has been affecting things. IMF says that the world economy is going to contract. So just yesterday, the world will contract, global economy contract by 3%. Nigeria will contract by 3.4%. But Godwin Emefiele, the central bank governor of Nigeria, came out with a robust speech yesterday that was posted by the central bank, which I believe everyone can read on the website. And he talks about turning the COVID-19 tragedy into an opportunity for a new Nigeria.
Yeah.
Now, it's very important to emphasize that he says in this speech, he says that, look, the policies he's outlined here are things that since he came into his position as central bank governor in 2014, he's been calling for a long time. He's been talking about us looking inwards, reducing our imports. He talked about how much we spend, about 1.3 trillion naira in 2014 annually on importing rice, fish, and some other